A man in Colorado was fined for collecting rainwater in 2 barrels in his own backyard. A couple in Florida was ordered to rip out the vegetable garden they'd grown for 17 years or face $50 a day in penalties. A family in California learned that the 28 gallons of gasoline in their garage exceeded the legal limit by 3 gallons. 3 gallons. That was enough for a citation. These aren't hypotheticals. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are court records, municipal citations, and exposed ordinances that most Americans have never heard of because nobody talks about them until you're already in violation. Right now, tonight, in your home, you may be breaking a law you didn't know existed, and the number of those laws is growing. Over the past 3 years, a wave of regulations has quietly reshaped what Americans can legally do to prepare for emergencies. Not with press conferences, not with public debate, but through omnibus bills that nobody read, fire codes that nobody checked, and emergency executive orders that were never rolled back. And the targets aren't corporations or criminals. The targets are people who collect rainwater, people who store food, people who keep fuel for a generator, people who build a cabin on their own land, people who grow their own food, and people who believe, perhaps naively, that taking care of yourself is still legal in this country. It's not entirely, not anymore, and definitely not in every state. There are now 8 categories of laws across the United States that directly restrict, regulate, or criminalize activities that self-reliant Americans consider basic common sense. And in at least 5 states, these categories stack on top of each other to create a legal environment so hostile to preparedness that even owning this knowledge becomes a strategic advantage. That's what this analysis is about. Every law, every state, every map, the 5 most restrictive states ranked and exposed, and the legal gray areas and loopholes that still give you room to operate. Before those close too, one necessary note before we begin. Nothing in this video is legal advice. We are not lawyers. Laws change, enforcement varies, and the only person qualified to guide your specific situation is a licensed attorney in your state. What we are is thorough, and what we found in the fine print should concern every single person watching this. Let's start with something that falls from the sky for free, and somehow they found a way to make even that a crime. Rainwater harvesting restrictions. Here's a question that sounds like it belongs in a dystopian novel. Can the government tell you that you can't collect rain? The answer is yes, and they already have. In Colorado, Senate Bill 09080 makes it clear residential rainwater collection is limited to 110 gallons. That's 2 55-gallon barrels total. A family of 4 needs roughly 12 gallons per day for drinking, cooking, and basic sanitation. So Colorado's legal limit covers about 9 days of bare minimum survival for a single person. After that, you're either buying water or breaking the law. Utah allows collection up to 2,500 gallons, but you have to register with the state. You need to tell the government how much rain you're catching. In Oregon, collecting water from rooftops is generally legal, but if it hits the ground first, if it flows across your property, that's somebody else's water, the state's water. Taking it without a permit is a violation. On the map, 35 states have essentially no restrictions. 8 states have moderate regulations, registration requirements, volume caps, approved container rules, and 7 states, shaded red, will penalize you for collecting rain without jumping through legal hoops. Most people who prep don't know these laws exist. You buy a rain barrel at a hardware store. You set it up, you feel responsible, and then you find out that in your state, the water falling from the sky onto your own property doesn't legally belong to you. The workaround? In restricted states, install a permitted cistern system. Stick to roof-only collection where that distinction matters. In Utah, register. It's annoying, but it's free. And in several states, agricultural exemptions exist. If your property qualifies as agricultural use, in some states that's as little as 5 acres with a few beehives. Rainwater rules relax significantly. These laws weren't written for preppers. They were written around water rights, a legal framework older than most states themselves. Western water law treats rainwater as a public resource. That framework was designed for ranchers and mining companies in the 1800s, not for a guy with 2 barrels in his backyard. That disconnect between the original intent of the law and how it's enforced now is a theme you're going to hear again and again. Because the next law doesn't care about the sky, it cares about what's already in your basement. Food stockpiling limits. You've spent 2 years building a food supply. Canned goods, freeze-dried meals, rice and mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. You did the math, you planned the calories, you rotated the stock. Now imagine a hurricane hits. The governor declares a state of emergency. And suddenly that food supply you built over 24 months of careful planning, the state might call it hoarding, and hoarding during a declared emergency is a crime in more states than you think. Most states have some form of anti-hoarding statute. These laws target retailers buying up essential goods for resale at inflated prices. Makes sense in theory, but the language in many statutes is dangerously broad. Excessive quantities and unreasonable accumulation appear without clear definitions. And in at least 12 states, these statutes don't just apply to Walmart. They apply to you and your home. Add the federal layer. FEMA's authority under the Stafford Act, combined with Executive Order 10,998 on the books since 1962, gives the federal government the ability to requisition food resources during national emergencies. Has it been used against individual preppers? Not yet, not publicly. But the legal framework exists, and not yet is not never. On the map, 20 states have no specific food stockpiling limits. 18 have emergency-only restrictions. Your food supply is legal right now, but becomes legally ambiguous the moment a disaster happens, which is exactly when you need it. And 12 states have active anti-hoarding statutes wide enough to include residential food storage. There's no federal definition of hoarding versus preparedness. A judge in California might look at your 6-month supply and call it prudent. A different judge in the same state might call it excessive. What do? First, rotate your stock. A first-in, first-out system isn't just good practice. It's your legal defense. Documented purchase dates proving gradual accumulation over months is fundamentally different from buying 200 cans of soup the day before a hurricane. Keep receipts. Photograph your shelves periodically with timestamps. Build a paper trail that tells a story, not of panic buying, but of methodical, long-term planning. That narrative matters if you ever have to tell it in front of a judge. Maintain quantities defensible as a reasonable household supply. What's reasonable? There's no hard number, but if you can articulate your supply as X months for X family members with a documented rotation schedule, that's a defensible position. Some preppers go further. An LLC-owned storage unit at a separate location. Technically, that's a business holding commercial inventory, not a person hoarding food. Is it bulletproof? No. But it's a significantly better legal position than a basement full of freeze-dried meals with no documentation. You've got water figured out, food figured out, but there's a resource in your garage right now with a legal limit most people don't know exists. And it's measured in gallons of something far more volatile. Fuel storage regulations, 25 gallons, that's the number. The National Fire Protection Association, NFPA 30, and the International Fire Code set the baseline for residential fuel storage across most of the United States. 25 gallons of gasoline in approved containers. A typical portable generator burns 1 to 2 gallons per hour under moderate load. At 25 gallons, you're looking at roughly 12 to 25 hours of continuous power. In the middle of a winter ice storm that knocked out power for a week, that's a countdown, not a supply. California has jurisdictions where portable gasoline limits drop to 5 gallons. 5. That's enough to run a generator for 3 to 5 hours. California wants you to survive a grid-down scenario with the energy equivalent of a long lunch break. The good news, diesel has different rules. NFPA allows 60 to 100 gallons of diesel in approved above-ground tanks. Diesel is less volatile, has a longer shelf life, and is legal to store in larger quantities. If your plan revolves around a gasoline generator, this might be the single best reason to switch. Propane opens another door. NFPA 58 allows larger residential quantities with mandatory setback distances. A 500-gallon propane tank is standard in rural America and perfectly legal with proper installation. Fire inspectors can enter properties during routine inspections. Fuel exceeding local limits means a fire code violation affecting your insurance, your property value, and potentially your occupancy status. Diversify your fuel strategy. Diesel for generators, propane for heating and cooking, solar and battery for baseline. No single fuel source. No single point of legal exposure. But there's a tool in your emergency kit that has nothing to do with fuel and everything to do with what happens when your phone stops working. And the government requires a federal license for it. Violate it and the fine starts at 6 figures. Ham radio licensing requirements. You bought a radio, maybe a dozen for your family and your group. Every survival guide tells you they're essential for grid-down communication. Here's what most of those guides don't mention. The moment you press that transmit button without a valid FCC amateur radio license, you've committed a federal offense. Under FCC Part 97, operating an amateur radio transmitter without a license carries fines starting at over $100,000. Per violation, the FCC has an enforcement bureau with direction finding equipment that can locate unauthorized transmitters with disturbing precision. The nuance most people miss. Listening is completely legal. You can buy a ham radio, scan frequencies, and monitor everything on the airwaves without any license. The law kicks in when you transmit. That radio in your go bag is perfectly legal until you key the mic. The technician license entry level requires a 35-question multiple choice exam and $35. No Morse code, no engineering degree. It gives you legal access to VHF and UHF frequencies covering most local and regional communication needs. The FCC does have provisions for unlicensed emergency communications when life is in immediate danger. But immediate is narrow, untested in prolonged scenarios, and decided after the fact. Banking your communication plan on an emergency exception is like planning retirement around winning the lottery. Alternatives: FRS radios require no license for short range under 2 miles. GMRS radios extend range significantly with a simple $70 license and no exam. CB radio is completely license-free. Mesh networking devices operate outside FCC amateur radio jurisdiction entirely. Get the technician license. An afternoon of studying and $35 is the cheapest insurance policy in preparedness. We break down the laws, the data, and the strategies that the mainstream won't touch. And if you want a complete 72-hour action plan, the Ghost Protocol series covers exactly that. Back to the laws. This next one is personal. It doesn't regulate what you store. It regulates where you live. Off-grid building restrictions. You saved for years. You bought land. You built a cabin, solar panels, well water, composting toilet, wood stove. Completely self-sufficient. No grid, no bills, no dependency. Then the county shows up, not to congratulate you, but to condemn your home. The word they'll use is uninhabitable, not because it's unsafe, but because it's not connected to the grid. The International Building Code adopted by most jurisdictions requires utility connections for a certificate of occupancy, grid electricity, municipal water or an approved well, and an approved septic system, which in many states excludes composting toilets. Without that certificate, you don't legally live there. You're camping on your own property in a structure you built that works perfectly. Florida is particularly aggressive. Multiple homeowners have faced condemnation orders for living without grid connections. California's Title 25 habitability standards are the strictest. It doesn't matter if your solar system outperforms your neighbor's grid connection. In the state's eyes, your home doesn't qualify as a home. On the map, 8 states offer meaningful rural exemptions. 22 are county dependent. Your experience changes wildly depending on which side of a county line you're on. And 20 states enforce strict compliance that makes fully off-grid living effectively illegal. Here's the absurdity condensed into a single sentence. A man living in a solar-powered cabin with clean well water, a composting system that exceeds EPA standards, and zero carbon footprint can be legally forced to connect to a coal-fired power grid or lose his home. Not because his system is inferior, but because it's not the approved system. The loopholes are creative. Tiny homes on wheels are classified as vehicles, not structures. Building codes don't apply. Agricultural exemptions relax habitability standards. Maintaining a minimal grid connection, even if you never draw a single watt, can satisfy the utility requirement while you run entirely on solar. Some off-gridders keep a single light bulb connected to the grid as their compliance fixture. It costs them $8 a month in service fees, but it keeps the county off their property. And in some states, forming intentional communities or cooperatives triggers different zoning classifications with more favorable rules. In the country that prides itself on self-reliance, building a home that requires zero external resources is in most places against the law. And if that makes your blood pressure rise, wait until you hear what they've done about your front yard. Front yard farming bans. Herman Ricketts and Tom Carroll grew vegetables in their front yard in Miami Shores, Florida, for 17 years. In 2013, the village passed an ordinance banning front yard vegetable gardens, with fines of $50 per day for growing food on their own property. Their case took 6 years of legal battles. In 2019, Florida passed a law protecting the right to grow vegetables on residential property. But that law exists because the problem existed first. And outside Florida, it's still happening. Municipal zoning ordinances regulate what you grow and where. HOA restrictions add another layer. Some prohibit raised beds. Some limit plant species. Fines compound at $100 a day or more. 15 states have right to garden protections. 20 states have no specific protection. And 15 states have widespread restrictions, making front yard food production a legal risk. Check your municipal code before you plant. Backyard gardens are almost never restricted, and in states with right-to-garden laws, you have statutory protection. Use it. In a country where grocery shelves emptied in hours during 2020, criminalizing residential food production isn't just absurd. It's a policy choice that makes communities less resilient. The next law deals with something far more contentious than tomatoes. Something 11 states now regulate inside your own home. Firearms storage laws. This one generates opinions. We're not here for opinions. We're here for laws, and the laws are changing fast. 15 states have enacted mandatory safe storage laws. The core requirement: firearms must be stored in a locked container with a trigger lock or both, particularly if minors are present. In California, Massachusetts, and New York, failure to comply is criminal, not civil. California's criminal storage law imposes felony charges if a minor gains access to a negligently stored firearm and causes injury. Massachusetts requires all firearms locked at all times when not under direct control, regardless of whether minors are present. The 2024 to 2025 cycle brought new mandates in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and others. The trend is clear and accelerating. On the map, 20 states have no safe storage mandate, 15 focus on minor access prevention only, and 15 have broad mandates applying to all owners, regardless of household composition. For preppers, this creates a genuine dilemma. A home defense firearms premise is rapid access. A firearm locked behind a combination takes 30 seconds to access, and 30 seconds during a home invasion is a lifetime. The answer is technology. Biometric safes, fingerprint, RFID, offer sub-2-second access. They satisfy storage requirements while maintaining practical defensibility. $300 to $1,000 is not cheap, but it's compliance-meeting capability. Know your state's current law, not last year's. This area evolves faster than any other on this list. And while we're on things that become illegal at the worst possible moment, let's talk about helping your neighbor. Because in 37 states, doing the right thing during a disaster can make you a criminal overnight. Price gouging laws. Category 4 hurricane bearing down on the Gulf Coast. Your neighbor needs a generator. You have a spare. He offers to buy it. Fair price. Maybe a little above what you paid because you stored it and maintained it. In 37 states and the District of Columbia, that handshake might make you guilty of price gouging. Price gouging laws activate during declared emergencies, capping essential goods at 10 to 15% above pre-emergency retail price. Essential goods: food, water, fuel, batteries, generators, medical supplies. Most people assume these laws target retailers. In some states, that's true. But in California, New York, Florida, and at least a dozen more, the statute covers any person. Private person-to-person sales during a declared emergency fall under the same framework as a corporate price hike. California caps at 10%, misdemeanor with fines up to $10,000 per incident. Florida uses unconscionable pricing. A prosecutor decides what's too much after the fact. That's not a rule. That's a judgment call. 13 states have no price gouging law. 15 restrict to commercial transactions, but 22 states and D.C. extend broadly to private individuals. The safest framework is a gift economy model. No money changes hands, no expectation of return. Pre-emergency contracts at agreed prices are generally exempt because the transaction predates the declaration. If you're part of a preparedness community, putting agreements in writing now while the sun is shining is one of the smartest legal moves you can make. America's 5 most restrictive states. We scored all 50 states across all 8 categories and ranked them by overall restrictiveness. These are the 5 states where the law is least friendly to self-reliance. Number 5, Massachusetts. 7.3 out of 10. The strictest firearms laws in the country. All firearms locked at all times, and the licensing process requires interviews, references, and local police chief approval. Building codes are strict with Title V septic requirements and mandatory electrical connections blocking most off-grid setups. Broad emergency powers. Price gouging statutes are expansive. The saving grace. Rainwater collection is legal and incentivized through municipal rebate programs. Agricultural Commission membership can unlock exemptions for rural properties. And west of Worcester, once you're past the suburban ring, enforcement loosens noticeably. Cape Cod and the islands have their own regulatory microclimate that's surprisingly more permissive. Number 4, Florida. 7.5, the surprise entry. Florida, the freedom state, the no-income tax state, the stand-your-ground state, scores this high for specific reasons. Off-grid building code enforcement is among the most aggressive nationally. Multiple homeowners in several counties have faced condemnation orders, not because their homes were dangerous, but because they weren't plugged in. Price gouging uses the unconscionable standard. The government decides what's too expensive after the fact, which means a prosecutor makes that call, not a statute. Anti-hoarding provisions activate every hurricane season, which in Florida means half the year. But Florida has bright spots too. The 2019 Right to Garden law is a national model. Rainwater is encouraged. Firearm preemption law prevents counties from stacking restrictions, and rural Florida, the Panhandle, the Heartland region, operates with minimal enforcement. Your experience in Florida depends entirely on whether you're in Miami-Dade or Levy County. Same state, different planet. Number 3, Colorado. 7.9, driven almost entirely by water. The 110-gallon rainwater limit is the most prepper-hostile water law in America. Full stop. No other state caps residential collection this low. Stack that with the 2024 Firearm Safe Storage Law. Denver Metro's aggressive building code enforcement and moderate emergency powers authority in the Front Range corridor from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs is deep red on our map. But Colorado splits dramatically along geographic lines. Rural parcels in the San Luis Valley with agricultural designation unlock water exemptions. The Crestone area has become a de facto off-grid community with minimal code enforcement. Unincorporated counties in the Western Slope operate under a functionally different regulatory regime than anything east of the Continental Divide. Number 2, New York. 8.8. The SAFE Act imposes comprehensive firearms storage and ownership restrictions that touch nearly every aspect of firearm preparedness. Emergency Powers Authority is among the broadest in the nation. Off-grid building is effectively impossible in the metro area, Long Island, and most of the Hudson Valley. Price gouging enforcement is aggressive with a 25% threshold. And if you live in New York City proper, add antenna restrictions, fuel storage limits below national baseline, and building codes that make any form of preparedness beyond a 72-hour go bag extraordinarily difficult. The escape valve is upstate. North of Albany, enforcement drops precipitously. Agricultural zones in the Finger Lakes region, the Adirondack periphery, and the southern tier operate under different rules entirely. Amish and Mennonite communities in these areas have built decades of legal precedent for off-grid living. Precedent that benefits anyone willing to navigate the same frameworks. For the 20 million people in the metro area and suburbs, New York is a legal minefield. Number 1, California. 9.2. If you're surprised you haven't been paying attention for the last 20 minutes, California leads or ties for the most restrictive position in 7 of our 8 categories. Criminal firearms storage penalties that can escalate to felony charges. 5-gallon portable fuel limits in some jurisdictions, not 25. Title 25 habitability standards that are the strictest in the nation. Price gouging capped at 10% with per incident fines reaching $10,000. Emergency powers that are expansive and frequently activated. Off-grid construction that faces not just building codes, but CEQA environmental review, a process that can take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars before you break ground. The one area where California isn't the worst, rainwater collection is legal and actively encouraged through municipal rebate programs. Small comfort when everything else you do to prepare exists in a legal shadow. But even California has cracks. Agricultural exemptions are genuinely powerful in rural inland counties. LLC structures can reclassify personal storage as commercial operations. Northern and eastern counties, think Siskiyou, Modoc, Lassen, have dramatically less enforcement capacity than the coast. The tiny home on wheels classification works statewide. California is the most restrictive state in America. It's also a big state, and big states have corners where the rules bend. The pattern across all five: urban cores are restrictive, rural peripheries are permissive. The law on paper and the law as enforced are often two different things. The gray area playbook. Every system has seams. The agricultural exemption is the single most powerful tool in the prepper legal toolkit. In dozens of states, agricultural classification exempts property from building codes, water restrictions, storage limits, and zoning enforcement. The threshold is lower than most think. 5 acres with documented activity like beekeeping, a small orchard, or even a Christmas tree operation shifts your entire legal category. Tax assessment changes. Building code softens. Water rules relax. Fuel storage limits increase for farm use. Some states don't even require 5 acres. 3 acres with active agricultural production qualifies in certain jurisdictions. The key word is documented. You need records, sales receipts, and an agricultural tax assessment on file with the county. If you can prove the land is producing, the law treats it differently. The LLC structure, commercial storage, operates under different limits than residential, often significantly higher. Fuel, food, and equipment all exist in a different regulatory tier when owned by a business entity rather than a person. A prepper with 40 gallons of gasoline in his garage is in violation of fire code. A small business with 40 gallons of fuel in a permitted commercial storage unit is operating normally. The LLC also provides liability protection, enables geographic distribution across multiple storage locations, and creates a legal separation between you and your supplies. It costs $50 to $500 depending on the state, plus annual maintenance fees. For the legal repositioning it provides, that's insignificant. One caveat: the LLC must be legitimate. It needs to file taxes, maintain records, and have a demonstrable business purpose. A shell LLC with no activity won't survive legal scrutiny. The tiny home on wheels, not a structure in most jurisdictions, but a vehicle or a recreational vehicle or a temporary dwelling. Whatever the classification, it's usually not subject to the International Building Code. No mandatory utility connections, no certificate of occupancy, no minimum square footage. The trade-offs are real: parking regulations, maximum stay durations in many counties, and sanitation requirements still apply. But for people who want to live off-grid without fighting building codes, the tiny home on wheels remains the most accessible legal path. Interstate positioning, the simplest and most powerful strategy. Colorado limits rainwater to 110 gallons. Wyoming, next door, has 0 restrictions. California caps fuel at 5 gallons portable. Nevada's enforcement is dramatically lighter. New York Metro is a regulatory fortress. Vermont, 3 hours north, is one of the most permissive states for off-grid living in the entire country. If you haven't bought land yet, the single most impactful decision you can make is choosing the right county in the right state. Not the right state, the right county. Because in America, the county you're in matters more than the state name on your license. A prepper in rural upstate New York has more legal freedom than a prepper in suburban Denver. Same country, radically different rules. The religious exemption, this requires nuance and honesty. Amish and Mennonite communities have established decades of legal precedent for off-grid living under First Amendment protections. Whether those exemptions extend to non-Amish individuals is legally contested. Courts use a sincerely held religious belief standard. Some have interpreted it broadly, others haven't. This is not a reliable primary strategy, but in the right jurisdiction with the right legal counsel, it has been used successfully. One more reality check. Every state is changing. What we've discussed is accurate as of early 2026. Legislation moves. Courts rule. Agencies reinterpret. The regulatory landscape for self-reliance is getting more complex, not less. Final word. One more time for the record. We are not lawyers. This analysis is educational content based on publicly available legal information as of early 2026. Laws change. Enforcement varies by county, by city, sometimes by the individual officer at your door. Before making any major preparedness decisions, consult a licensed attorney in your state. 8 categories of laws, 50 different rule books, and a system that treats self-reliance not as a virtue, but as a regulatory problem. The water on your roof, the food in your basement, the fuel in your garage, the radio in your drawer, the home you built with your own hands, the vegetables in your front yard, the way you store your property, and your right to help your neighbor during a crisis. 8 things. 8 ways the law says, not so fast. The question isn't whether these laws will affect you. It's whether you'll know about them before it's too late to adjust. Ignorance of the law has never been a defense, but awareness of the law has always been a strategy. Share this information with anyone who values self-sufficiency, because right now they might be breaking a law they don't even know exists. Stay informed, stay prepared. If this story changes the way you look at the laws governing your own backyard, please subscribe and like the channel. We are digging up the history and the regulations they've tried to bury in the fine print. Plant the seeds for your future. The next treasure of knowledge will be opened soon.